Hello everyone, welcome to Frequency Bone Summer Music Connection 10. Video, what is this? Video 5 from the series The Art of the Student. And I was just remembering what one of my great mentors said to me. He said, if you can't find it, make it. If you can't find it, make it. That puts one in a very interesting position, doesn't it? And I think, when I think back to myself growing up, and I was living on a farm some of the time, I wasn't taking a lot of lessons during that period of time at all. I would always happen to find it. But if I couldn't find it, I would make it somehow. So I didn't have access to YouTube and a million, people teaching on it. I had a few recordings. A lot of other players, I had some Tommy Dorsey recordings, John Swallow's solo recording, Henry Charles Smith's solo recording. And, I was loving the orchestral literature, and every chance I could, I'd listen to, a record of what we'd have. And on the radio. And I was always in a situation where I'd find myself discovering. If you can't find it, make it. How can you do that if you don't want to discover? And one of the biggest things I'm finding out is that I'm not sure how much people are allowing themselves to play with the territory anymore. And I keep coming back to this, and this has been one of the themes, hasn't it? If you've heard these other videos before this one, I'm talking about discovery quite a bit. And discovery really is start with what you can do and expand. Take that what you can do as a starting place. We have to start somewhere. You start with what you have. And then start exploring in different directions. For example, this person had a Skype session with me today. And they were talking about vibrato. They were talking about this one person they had a lesson with, says to play a note and then add a little vibrato with the note. At the end of the note, another person who they took some lessons with said, well, they like to do their vibrato very, very measured, rhythmically. And I know other players that have done that too, whether they're thinking, they feel better having a rhythm to the vibrato. A very set rhythm. I'm sure they change it according to need. But this is what they were passing on, maybe for this particular student to have some kind of beginning can-do point. And that's fine. I just found myself when I was listening to this going, you know what? I had a natural diaphragm vibrato when I was starting, like when I was 12. And I remember my teacher, Ronald Ricketts, said to me, that's good, but we don't usually do that on trombone. We usually do it with our jaw. Okay. So I started to work on it. It's a good exercise for the corners too, and became a natural part of my playing. And every once in a while I'd put in the diaphragm vibrato because I thought it was a little more something fit an emotional context of the music with me, with that. I went to another teacher of mine, Stephen Zellmer, said, you know what? I asked him about his vibrato, and he said, you know what? I go by what this one opera singer said, or some singer said to him. He said, the vibrato happens in you naturally. If it's moving in you, you're naturally going to produce it. So I thought was interesting. That was our only discussion on it ever. And by that time, I had already worked on what my other teacher said, Ronald Ricketts. Then I remember I went to Tanglewood one summer, and I had the late Milton Stevens give me lessons in that summer. When was that summer? It was a long time ago, 1972. And he said, talked about vibrato. He thought my vibrato was too slow. And I never had thought about speeds before. And when I'd listened to Tommy Dorsey, I'd use slide vibrato, and obviously it was faster than, obviously my jaw vibrato was. So he said it should be at least 5 vibrations per second. And I thought, wow, I couldn't understand why putting a number to it. So I tried to speed it up a little bit. And then I realized, well, wait a minute. Vibrato can have different speeds. You know, I hear string players all the time playing with different speeds of vibrato. Not only speeds, but different widths. Some narrower, some faster. And then again, you have the Dorsey trombone thing. It's close together, and it's a bit quick, but it sounds just like sugar coating, you know. It doesn't sound like, you know, you're putting your finger in a socket and going, ah! Ooh. Just a beautiful, you know, I almost don't want to say singing, because singers have different vibratos too. I've had some singers, the really, really wide operatic vibrato, very, very quick. So vibrato has speed. It has width, narrowness. I guess you could say that's part of speed, but not the whole thing, because you can have a fast, very wide vibrato. So it doesn't necessarily go together. But part of my point was that in this was, when I was younger and I would hear other instruments put vibrato and my teacher wasn't talking to me about it, my teacher at the time, I did something that I felt was vibrato, which the diaphragm started to do it. I think it was probably part diaphragm, part something moving in, not quite like that, but something moving in my throat. So something like that. And certain things that seemed to work for when I look back, and probably other things that sounded like, you know, it's too much and slow. So my point in this, again, is something was moving in me. I wanted vibrato so bad. Something in me needed to express itself that way. So I found it. Now, a teacher heard it and went, well, try this one. And so one of the arts of a student, if you want to get more out of a teacher sometimes, is come with something. Come with something. Maybe there's another law or art of the student. Come with something. And then someone can be prompted to say, hey, wait a minute, or inspired by what you're doing and say, well, here's another way you might want to try. And here's a way that maybe will be more efficient. Maybe you'll have more control over it, even though obviously, and I talked with many woodwind players about it when I got into the Boston Symphony. And they have great control over the diaphragm vibrato, from fast to slower, all these different things. So I think control is just a matter of having control. And the more you have a relationship with a part of your physiology that is responsible for the physical production of what you feel mentally or emotionally, you work on it in different ways and you can get command over that particular part of your body, whether it's your lip, whether it's your jaw. I knew people who've had vibrato more like this, some more like this, some more with the throat, with the diaphragm, even with the head. I know many great trumpet players, Armando Guitarra, Ralph Smedvig, Tim Morrison, and I had trombone students and others who would have kind of a head vibrato. Now, some of you out there might be thinking, oh, that's awful. That's not a good vibrato. I don't really care what you think about that. But I do care about it because I think it would be excellent if you could use that. If that was your first response, then you have biased vibrato. And you might have a lot of things you're biased to. I'm not saying you shouldn't have what you like and don't like, but if we keep blocking ourselves off, and as soon as we hear something that is unusual, we put a thing on it. Oh, that's not the right way. Well, wait a minute. In the bigger span of art, looking at it as an intrinsic expression of the individual life on all their three levels, well, mind, body, soul, just looking at those three basic levels, there might be something very important about that vibrato that's being expressed. Okay, so instead of just getting rid of it, explore it, look at it. And then maybe another way they'll feel better with. But there was something in that. There was something in them doing that. You know, I've heard people talk about how pedagogy is really advanced. And so students now, I wonder sometimes if they're being deprived of some discovery at times. Probably not. If the teacher says, I want you to work on this, and says there's a serious student meaning one who's going to have immediate application, who is going to be regular and consistent with it, who's going to stick with it to a degree that they're going to actually come across obstacles. How can you learn without obstacles? Okay? So they still will have, the learning experience, the discovery experience. But I just believe it should be broadened at times. When I told this one person today, who I was giving the Skype lesson to, and they were talking about vibrato, I said, well, I use about 5 different kinds. Sometimes interchangeable, meaning mixture of some. That was a mixture of jaw and my kind of diaphragm throat vibrato. I told him about another one called U vibrato, the letter U. U, which I use for a lot of different kinds of effects. It almost sounds like an articulation, but it's kind of like a scary, 60s weird science fiction vibe it can get. Like the theremin. That's an instrument. They were responsible for those high-pitched sounds of those early science fiction films. It's amazing. You can Google it and look at the theremin, and it's just amazing the kinds of sounds they can produce. So we usually think of some of these things as extended techniques, but at one time vibrato was an extended technique until it became woven into the expression of probably, I don't know exactly when it started, and who knows really when, but brings up the whole thing about technique and expansion. And one time I was in El Sistema in Venezuela, and that was such a great experience. The students were very open. But Miguel Sanchez, he's a great trombonist there. He's I think probably one of the big teachers there, and wonderful player. And I was circular breathing, and the kids were like, oh, and he kind of looked at me like, I'll never forget that expression that he made, because he thought, well, the students now are going to want to just circular breathe instead of just learning how to breathe, in maybe a way that's a little more in line with the music they'll be playing. But I know some people, and this is I think interesting for the student. If you're going to change teachers, you students, and you get used to a certain way, and you're getting skillful in the ways that you've been taught, to go to another teacher who's going to give you some really different ideas, that's going to be a process of you being able to melt down a little bit and take some new things in. If you think, nope, this is the way, this is the only way, and this is the way I want to play, and that other stuff is, whatever, well, you might miss out. Maybe you won't. But I know John Swallow taught me very different than Stephen Zellmer did in terms of legato. I had to move my tongue way back, and as a student, I was right there with him and saw the significance of what he was talking about. I wasn't so attached to what I was doing before that I thought it couldn't be done. I worked on it, and actually I got caught up to that very quickly. A couple days. Felt really good with it. But it turned out to be extremely useful. I started to just do. So if we want to keep moving in our music making, what are the arts for that? Well, sometimes you can thank some composers for writing some pieces that really challenge people, like Ravel did, and trombones. Wow, this is hard. Now, a lot of high school students, many can play it without much of a problem. And so I guess the pedagogy has advanced a bit in a certain kind of way. Okay? It's interesting with this whole thing, isn't it? I had no idea that this art of the student would start to get so involved in this kind of way. But the art at that point, for someone, for example, changing teachers and going to someone else's, to be open to them. You have to be receptive. Take it up, work on it, just don't come back. Come back honestly. Wow, I'm having a real problem with this. That means you at least worked on it. Or wow, I've discovered this, and this. People like to know that. I think teachers like to know what you've done, what you've discovered, and how you can show for it, in your playing. There's so much that could be said about this, but at all levels, if you're not receptive as a beginner, an intermediate, or an advanced student, or a college student, or a grad student, or a professional in an orchestra, how are you going to expand? Now, is improvement equivalent to the word expanding? They're related. They're related. Expanding also means getting out of your comfortability. And let's face it, it adds more tools. It increases our language of what we can do and express. But at a certain level, again, it's dosage. Too much too soon might be too much. I tend sometimes to throw a lot at someone and then see what happens to them. Then I go, oh, okay, let's pull this away, let's pull this away, let's pull this away. But I said it, and it's in there. It's in there, waiting till there's a need.